So let us begin the topic of Mashiach, Messiah. Now, I want to know why, how, and when. Let's start with that. The first question is really why. I mean, why have a concept of Mashiach, of Messiah? Now, this is something that's so fascinating. People don't realize this, that this concept, the Rambam, Maimonides writes, is now known throughout the entire world, when this was a concept that was very locally Jewish until numerous religions came along and said they had a Messiah. So now what happens is because of this, the world all of a sudden knows this idea. Now, I want to just add something to you also, fascinating with our whole, we're talking on Zoom tonight. If you realize what's going to happen in the prophecies of Mashiach coming, how you can look at technology and realize the amazing things that are unfolding. Because we talked about a concept of a Mashiach, which we'll explain what that means, this leader coming to the world. How is someone going to know about it? You know, when you read the Torah 4,000 years ago, how are you going to know that this Messiah came, this Mashiach came? Well, the answer is today you're going to know in 1 minute. The world is aware of a concept. They have a lot of misconceptions about it. But as Maimonides writes, even false messiahs that have come in the past, they have perked people's interest to understand there's such a concept. So therefore, it paves the way when the Mashiach does come. We're going to know about it in 2 seconds. It'll be on the internet. Mashiach's here, and that will be known, and it's going to make the experience that we're going to go through. Now, I want to ask the question, though, to start out, why? Like, why do we need Mashiach? Why can't we just have the world, and you do what you do, and you get your reward for the good things you do? Why do you need to have this idea of Mashiach in the first place? To explain this, I got to go back to something very, very deep here, which touches on the purpose of life. There's many ways to talk about this. I want to explain to you the way the great sage Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, the Ramchal, explains this. Very, very beautiful, deep in his book, the Das Tfunas, the Knowing Heart. It's translated in English. He says there like this: when we live in the world, you know, we all experience different things that seem to control our lives. You think it's the government, it's your boss, it's all the different things that seem to have some other power over the history of the world. These are all essentially illusions. What the mystics call the Sitra Achra, that people think there's another power in the world. There's not. That's what the Shema is. The Shema is there is one source of everything and one power alone. And anything else that does what it does is because that is what God is allowing it to happen for the various reasons that he is allowing and how he's directing the world. Now, if you through life go through everything and you never have a difficulty, it's very hard to appreciate the good. I used to, when I first left Israel, I went to Montreal, and I was teaching in a school, and I got there, and it was like I guess late August, and it was a warm sunny day, and the kids said, "Please, can we go outside and sit outside?" And like it was like my first day or something, you know, and the way they asked was so genuine. They just so wanted to go outside. I couldn't say no. And we went outside. And then I spent my first winter in Montreal, and I understood the kids. Because if you spend a winter in Montreal, when you get a sunny day, warm, that's it. You appreciate the sunny day because you just had a miserable winter. In life, we understand perfection when we understand that negativity has been removed. When you see there are other powers in the world and there are other things controlling it, and you think that's what's happening, and then you see, wow, this world has been directed all along, and God's in control. Say the sages, there's no greater understanding and clarity of God that you're going to have than that moment. Because You've gone through all the other options. You thought this was directing your life. That was, you have fears. We have things that we're nervous about. We have all these things. And then when we realize the end of history, that this has all been directed by God to get to this point, we exclude all other possibilities and we come to the clear knowledge there's one God. That's how Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto explains history. History is other forces that we don't, we give control to, and we work on our lives trying to realize only one source. And then when the world plays out and history plays out, you realize that God directed every step of it. That's the process of Mashiach. Okay? The process of Mashiach is not the idea that, we're all doing our things and we're all messed up, and then some person comes along and he changes everything. That's not the idea here. The idea is the process of Mashiach is the process of humanity. Mashiach's process is the process of the world from the beginning, seeing through lies and through illusions to the end when humanity can see clearly and realize there is one God. That's the process. Okay? Mashiach is a person that is born in this world who is a very wise sage. He's, according to the Rambam, seems to be wiser than Shlomo, King Solomon. According to everyone, he's almost as great prophet as Moshe, but he's not. He will not be as great of a prophet as Moshe, because there can't be. Because one of the rules is the Torah can never change in any way, shape, or form. So Moshe's prophecy is the highest prophecy of a human being. Mashiach will be close to that. So it's a person that's born, but he really is representing us. Okay? The Mashiach is called the Melech, a king. The Talmud says the Melech is the Lev Ha'am, is the heart of the people. And you need to understand this. And we could talk about politics in some other time of what's going on in the world, which is bizarre. But unfortunately, the leaders of the people are supposed to represent the people. In a democracy, it happens because you vote for the person, so you think most of the people support this person. But the idea that whoever becomes a leader represents the people, that's the idea of the king is the heart of the people. By the way, that's why in Hebrew, the word melech is the middle letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Why? Because it's the heart. It's the middle that pumps out to everything. The Mashiach, what he is he is the pinnacle of the people. He represents the process that we get to reveal God in the world that we've all gone through for these 5,000, 6,000 years to get there. And he is the pinnacle and the leader of the people. That's who he is. And that's why we need this process of Mashiach. Because the process is not just about a person, it's about us. That's why, by the way, fascinating. We all heard of the first human being was called Adam, right? Adam in English, Adam. The letters Adam is an acronym. The Aleph, the first letter of the word Adam, the A in English, stands for the name Adam, first person. The second letter of his name, the Dalet, which is the D sound, stands for David. And the last letter of his name, Adam, the Mem, stands for Mashiach. Now, why is it that Adam's name is an acronym for Adam, David, and Mashiach? The answer is because it is the story of humanity. It is the story of this process. I'll tell you something else. I mean, we're doing a Noachai group. We have some other people also, but it's fascinating. It says actually in the Medrash that the Mashiach's essential job after he comes is to teach the non-Jews. It's fascinating because there's a verse in Yirmiyah that says that the Jews will become aware of it themselves, to teach themselves, and the Mashiach's main job will actually be according to the Medrash, to teach the nations of the world. Fascinating Medrash. So that is why we need to have this process of Mashiach. So what is Mashiach doing when he comes? It's the process, we said now, of bringing clarity in the world. That's what it is. Imagine a world, and before we get to the idea of peace and the utopia and everything else we'll get to, but imagine a world where people knew what was true, right? Right? Could you imagine that? Could you imagine we're living in America now and we see what's going on? Could you imagine if everyone was like clear and there was no games and no politics and no machinations? They said there is a God in the world and he runs the world and this is what he wants. So the idea of Mashiach is a process of removing the lies and bringing clarity to the world. That's what it is. Now, I'll tell you a deep thing here, because there seems to be a contradiction, no contradictions. In the Talmud, there's different opinions. They always represent different levels of understanding. There's one opinion that says that when Mashiach comes, there's no difference between this world as it is now and the times of Mashiach, only that there is no, it's called Shibud Malchus. There's no constraints of the nations fighting each other and control, but people have a normal life. Healthy, wealthy, very nice, good. But it's in the realm of normal. There is another Talmudic statement that talks about times of Mashiach and says that all the prophecies that were said were actually not talking about the world to come. They were talking about the times of Mashiach. But all these fantastical, amazing things, these supernatural things, are the times of Mashiach. But how do you understand the process? The answer is like this. When Mashiach first comes, it's in a stage. The first stages of Mashiach coming is a world of clarity. Truth, clarity, peace. What's the Mashiach's job? You know what his job is? His job description. Maimonides says his job description is he will build a temple in Jerusalem. He'll gather all the Jews to the land of Israel, build a temple. Temple, as we know, is for all the nations of the world. As we know in King Shlomo's prayer, Solomon's prayer, he should answer everyone who comes to the temple. Okay? So he builds the temple. He gathers the Jews back to the land of Israel. And he removes the evil in the world. That's his job description. If he fails, he's not the Mashiach. In other words, if a person comes along and he's a very righteous rabbi, and he fights these wars, but he doesn't succeed in the job at the end, he's not the Mashiach. So the first step is this world of clarity, of truth. And then afterwards, we start to move into more fantastic and supernatural realities. But the Mashiach is not the time of the world to come. It's not what we call Olam Haba. It's not the afterlife. It's not what it is. It is a stage along the way where the world is peaceful and there's harmony and people can learn Torah, develop spiritually, be connected to God, and as Maimonides writes, thereby attain more of the world to come because they have the settled mind and their lives are out of the world. They have a settled mind to be able to go and to do the right thing, thereby earning their eternal connection, which is called Olam Haba, which is the world to come. Okay? You have any questions, write them down. We'll get to it in a minute, because what I just said now is a very big and important statement. People misunderstand this, right? Olam Haba, the world to come, is a different experience, which we'll talk about another time, but there's something called the soul world. When a person dies, they go to the soul world, and then afterwards there is what's called the Olam Haba after the end of history. But the Mashiach is a certain point in history that comes, and it's a great time, but it's not a time where it's great. You could sit back and watch movies all day and do nothing. It's great because it's a time of clarity and truth where people develop spiritually more and more, and then they can elevate to even higher spiritual levels, as the prophets talk about, in more amazing levels that are somewhat supernatural, not just in this world. But it starts out as a natural process. Okay. So far I discussed why, and I discussed what's going to happen when Mashiach comes. Let's talk a little bit about the how and when, okay? Because the how and when are big topics, okay? By the way, obviously, I'm not getting into now, people want to ask, we talk about, the other religions claim, but obviously there's many problems other religions claim. The most obvious one is what Nachmanides said in the Great Debate, which is that when the Mashiach comes, there's supposed to be no more wars. You can't make an idea that you're going to come back another time. That's not what happens. You have one shot. Mashiach comes, and it says when he comes, there's going to be no more wars. There'll be peace. There'll be all these great things happening, which the world has not experienced yet. Obviously, with the wars of the 20th century surpassing anything that we've seen before. So now, there's a lot of discussion about the things surrounding the coming of Mashiach. Wars, the war of Gog and Magog, the war of there's supposed to be a very tremendous war at the end of time that comes before the Mashiach comes. And we don't know exactly when the Mashiach is going to come. We don't know. As a matter of fact, the Talmud says that whoever tries to tell you and calculate, if you get a person, a great sage, it could be a rabbi, it could be a knowledgeable person. He tells you, oh, this is what's going to happen. That's what's going to happen. It's not right. You can't do it. And it says that's a bad thing. It's a bad thing to try to calculate exactly when the Mashiach is going to come. There's different reasons for that. And I want to explain to you why you can't calculate when it's going to happen or even how exactly it's going to happen. There are a lot of prophecies of what's going to happen. And then we could talk about it at some point, but it's amazing. It describes the 7 years before Mashiach comes. When there's going to be a war, when there's going to be a famine, all the things lines up. There's something that's called the Shemitah, the 7-year cycle. And the Talmud goes through what's going to happen every year, leading up to the Mashiach coming, and he comes at the end of the 7th year, the end of the Shemitah year. So why can't I go and tell you, I read the news? If you go in the Talmud, I could show you the Talmud where it says there's going to be a war with a nation called Iraq. Nope, I'm sorry, I said it wrong. I was translating from my Hebrew. This Bavel was Iraq, and the nation next to Bavel was called Paras, which is Persia, which is today what? It's modern day Iran. And the Talmud says, and this is why you have to be, try to do what you can to not believe the political stuff of that, Iran just wants a nuclear weapon, nuclear power because they're trying to light up their cities. Because the Talmud says that the wars that are initiated before Mashiach come is through Paras, which is Iran. I could show you a lot of things that will point to politics and history right now, and you'll say, "Whoa, this Mashiach looks like exactly what it's going to be." So how come I can't do that? Are we not allowed to do that? So I want to explain you a couple of reasons. The first one's like this: you have to understand that there's a verse in the prophets that talks about when the Mashiach is going to come, and it says in the prophets, "Bi'ito achishena." Now, the translation of those words means the Messiah will come bi'ito, in its set time. Achishena, I will make it come fast. Now, we could all hear that's a contradiction. The prophet's saying the Mashiach will come in its set time, bi'ito, achishena, and I'll make it come early, fast. That's a contradiction. You can't say, when are we meeting? Well, we'll meet exactly 8 o'clock. But unless we're going to meet earlier. We're not meeting 8 o'clock. It doesn't make sense, a contradiction. The Talmud says there's two ways, the two processes that this could happen. One process is people act righteously. If people act righteously, we get our act together, the Mashiach will come speedily and could come today. And if we don't get our act together and we don't act the way we're supposed to, God forbid, then there's a set time where it's going to happen no matter what, by hook or crook. Now, if you understand that, it really opens up a whole new dimension to this understanding of Mashiach. Why? Because it's got a set time that it won't go past. that if we don't earn it, God knows the time, and time is set. You could try to read in the book of Daniel, you will not understand it. So I have a series in the book of Daniel, but we don't get into that because when you get into the end of Daniel, he conceals it and the angel tells him to conceal it and you can't understand it. You're not going to. It's not possible. There is a set time where it will happen no matter what if we don't earn it. But if we earn it, it could happen today. That means what? Now I want you to understand this because this is so fascinating, so deep, what I'm going to tell you now. Just amazing. I'm going to give you an example first from something you might have seen in the Torah portions the past few weeks. We saw this idea that Jews would be in Egypt for 400 years. It didn't say Egypt. It said we'll be in a foreign land. We understood it meant Egypt. But the calculation of the Jews in Egypt is only 210 years. So I don't understand. You could read the prophecy as the Jews will be in foreign lands, including Egypt and other lands, for a total of 400 years. But it seemed to imply that it'll be 400 years. You would have thought Egypt. So how do you understand it? We're 210 years in Egypt. So the Talmud says, because what happened was, if you count from the birth of Isaac, Yitzchak, there's 190 years from the birth of Isaac, which he was a stranger. He didn't own the land of Israel. He was kicked out from here and there. So there were strangers from the birth of Isaac. So the promise was to Abraham's children, the birth of Isaac. 190 years is the count till they went down to Egypt. That means if you add 190 years from Isaac until they went down to Egypt, and the period of Egypt, 210 years, that's a total of 400 years. But wait a minute. The text seemed, I would have thought maybe the text meant 400 years in Egypt. I understand it doesn't, but it could, I would have maybe read it that way. Listen to this amazing answer. The reason is like this. We have free will. And therefore, the world God set up is not locked in that we are robots. It's not what's happening. We have free will to act. And no matter what we do, God's plan is going to happen. That's true. But we have free will. And therefore, the sages say, if the Jews could have handled being in Egypt 400 years, the prophecy would have come out 400 years in Egypt and there'd be no more exiles. Since they were not in the spiritual level to handle it, they were only able to handle 210 years. The prophecy had another pathway that it went through, which was the 190 years previously from the time of Yitzchak. Now, if you understand this, ladies and gentlemen, you can't believe it. It's unbelievable. This means that every prophecy that happens is going to happen exactly the right way. And we're going to have free will. And with using our free will, God is going to get us where we have to go. And that's why Maimonides says you can't figure out when Mashiach's going to come. Because we have free will. Only after it happens, you can look back and you can see the prophecies and say, oh, that's what it was. It happened exactly right. But when you're in it, you don't know because there are many pathways that it could happen because our free will is also part of the calculation. It's an amazing idea. And I'm very hopeful because, we don't know. Like, we know there's this scary war of Gog and Magog, this tremendous war at the end of time before Mashiach comes. I'm not saying this is the case, but I wish we would merit that tremendous war was World War II. We all live a blip in history. But if you realize that the state of Israel came into being right after World War II, if you have a global view and Mashiach came tomorrow, and that was the war of Gog and Magog, that would be wonderful. I'm not saying it is, I don't know. I'm saying you can't figure out exactly because there are paths that can happen. And therefore, since Mashiach come today, if we earn it, or is a set time, therefore, for people who go and say the Messiah is happening today, tomorrow, it's wrong because we're in a vibrant process that we could bring it about through our action. We have free will, but it's going to happen one way or another. So I want to have one other idea why we don't know exactly when Mashiach's going to come. The reason is like this. Imagine a guy was in jail. The worst way to be in jail is you don't know when you're getting out. Mm-hmm. If you know you're getting out in a year, it's bad, but you know. The suffering of exile that we're going through right now means that we don't know. If you knew Mashiach was coming this day, it would alleviate the process of exile and the yearnings that we need to have. We need to yearn for a time of Mashiach. We need to yearn, everybody here. We all need to yearn for a reality where there's truth in the world. And I'm speaking specifically to you all here because we all live in a world right now that is so crazy that if you're in this class, you are one of the few who has their mind and their brain about right when you see the world going completely crazy. So we have to yearn for a time where there's clarity and everyone gets their act together. Okay? Okay, good. Now let's go a little bit deeper into some of these concepts, some of the time frame. So there is a amazing teaching in the Talmud. It's like this. It says the time of the world is based on 6,000 years from the creation of Adam. We're not talking about before the creation of Adam. That could be a different class to understand how old the age of the universe is. I have a Kabbalistic source I can share with you at some point that explains the world is 18 billion years from a Kabbalistic source that was written thousands of years ago. I'm not talking about the age of the universe now. That's not the discussion. I'm talking about from the creation of Adam and Chava, the first human beings with a soul that were created in the world. That time span, the Talmud says, will be a 6,000-year time span. And then the seventh millennium, going into 6001 to 7, is called the Great Shabbat. Okay, does anyone know what year we're in now? So right now we're getting pretty far along, right? We're 5,782. We're moving. A couple hundred years we have left until 6,000 years. So if we have 6,000 years in the 7,000 millennium, and we're 5,800 years in, so we have 200 years till the 6,000th year. What does that mean? What does that mean when Mashiach has all work? Tell me what the Talmud says. Amazing stuff. It says like this. It says the first 2,000 years of creation, there was no Torah. Torah wasn't given. Abraham was born in the year 1,948 to the creation of the world, creation of Adam and Eve, for the beginning of time. So he, at 52, different texts, how old he was when he fully had cognition of Hashem properly. That's the first 2,000 years. So 2,000 years now, until Abraham becomes Abraham, the world is void. 2,000 years of unclarity. The Torah has not been given. You can find God if you want, but the Torah has not been given, and there's not an Abraham. From 2,000 years to 4,000 years, it was the time of Torah. That's when we got the Torah. The Jews got the Torah, and that's when Abraham taught Torah. The temple was built. And then, since the last 2,000 years could either be a time of Messiah, Mashiach, if we earn it. And for whatever we don't do, it just loses that time. So the last 2,000 years in history was potentially all Mashiach, all could be an all-time Mashiach, but right now Talmud says we haven't earned it, but it could have happened any point in that time. So we live in a world of 6,000 years, and Mashiach therefore will come soon, because to go to 6,001 to enter the Great Shabbat, it's happening soon. Now, I can't tell you when it's going to happen. I already mentioned to you the Talmud talks about Iran. So if we understand the importance of not letting Iran get a nuclear bomb, both politically, but more importantly, also through our acting properly. So here's another one. But I'll tell you, the Talmud gives the ultimate sign. Remember, the Talmud's, is thousands of years old, right? Even though it's codified in the Babylonian was codified in year 489, but it's the Talmud is the passed down tradition going back to Moshe. The Talmud actually gives the sign, the ultimate sign when Mashiach's ready to come. You know what it is? You're going to be amazed here. But maybe you won't. You know why you won't be amazed? Because we live in a world already. I don't know, I'm not sure, everyone's age here, but if you were born after 1948, you already lived in a world of the state of Israel, right? But if you would have gone back 200 years ago, and you lived 200 years ago, and someone told you there'd be a land called Israel, you'd say that's not possible. I mean, it's unbelievable. The whole story that there were all the Arabs there, it's not true. If you would, you can read it. There's a book that goes called From Time Immemorial, which was the Arabs had hired this woman, Joan Peters, to write a book about their plight, and she researched it, and she came out that it wasn't true, because the people living in Israel before 48 were nomads who were wandering through, were poor Arabs who came in from different places, because Israel was desolate. Read the story of Mark Twain from the 1850s, talking about what Israel looked like when he made his famous trip to the Holy Land. It was like he said, it's terrible, it's desolate. You read Mark Twain's thing there, his review. It's like, who could live like this? He was so upset, he was so distraught that the Holy Land was barren. So that's the way the Holy Land was for a very long time, from the exile of the Jews. And the Torah says, the Bible says that we will exile you. And in the curses, where God says the temple will be destroyed, be sent away, there's Nachmanides points out there's a blessing there at the end where it says that no one else will be able to settle the land. So the land really was, the fruitful, beautiful land of Israel was desolate for a long time. The Talmud says 52 years, a bird didn't fly over the land. It was so desolate. Talmud says, though, what's going to be one of the ultimate signs Mashiach is close? It says in the future, there's going to be a time where the land of Israel is going to give its fruit again. Now, guys, I don't know. I don't know if you ever had the fruit of Israel, but I got to tell you something. I imagine a lot of you are from Texas, I guess. I mean, I really like Texas. Texas is a good place. I like Texas. But if you take the fruit of Israel and you eat it, you'll be amazed. Mm-hmm. It tastes so good. It's a different thing. It's amazing. So the Talmud said that's it. That's one of the signs Mashiach's coming. One day the land of Israel will be giving fruit. That's what's happening today. So many of the signs that it's happening are in full bloom. Okay, that it's happening. When exactly, where, how? No one, I don't know. On that point, I'll tell you an amazing other thing. I told you there are 6 days, 6,000 years, and the seventh millennium. What does that line up with you in your mind? It lines up with the 6 days of creation and the Sabbath, right? And that's exactly right. It lines up to every day became 1,000 years. And there are Kabbalistic sources that line up everything that's happened in history, lining up with that time. From the beginning of the world, from the year 0 to 1,000 is day 1. Okay? From 1,001 to 2, it's day 2. According to this calculation, there's an amazing book written hundreds of years ago by the Vilna Gaon, where he calculates when the Jews will come back to the land of Israel. Because it says that Adam and Eve were created on the 6th day, which will be the 5,000th millennium, because 6 days is 5,001 to 6,000, the 6th day. And he calculates, the Talmud says, when Adam and Eve Adam stood up on his legs, stood up. And it says the 5th hour of the day, he calculates the year, he writes, would be 1948. Pretty amazing. That's already written hundreds of years ago that says that this process is in motion. That is the process of the Mashiach that leads us into the 7th millennium, which is when the world really changes and we go into a higher spiritual process. But this idea of Mashiach has to be understood. And we have to go back to what we said in the beginning. I don't want anyone to think of it like it's being done to us. It's the idea of we bring the Mashiach being the human process of acting properly in the world, removing the lies from the world, and having a time of clarity, peace, and goodness that's just going to flourish more and more, leading us into more supernatural times, into the seventh millennium, the great Sabbath, times of the world to come. That is a process that we bring about by acting properly, by doing the right thing. And that's why we can bring the Mashiach literally today. There's an argument in the Talmud when Mashiach's going to come, like what month he'll come in. There's different months in the Jewish calendar. There's the month of Nisan, which is the miracle months. And there's a month of Tishrei, which is, Nisan, we came out of Egypt, and Tishrei is when there's the new year, Rosh Hashanah. But that's kind of judgment. So one opinion is it comes through judgment. And that if we earn it, yes, it can come through judgment. If we don't earn it, so then it comes in the month of Nisan, when it's the kindness of Hashem that brings it to us that we don't have. That's why if you look, I don't know, I'm sure there's some of you are well versed in the verses of the Tanakh, of the prophets. But there's one verse which says that the Mashiach is called a poor person riding on a donkey. Right? You probably heard that image. There are other places where it talks about Mashiach coming up from the clouds, like from the heavens, a supernatural thing. Of course, meaning he's human, but coming from some type of a positive, supernatural way. And the Talmud says it depends how he comes. The idea of being poor means we don't earn it. We didn't earn it. So God was kind to us, like took us out of Egypt, and he brings the Mashiach. We didn't earn it. The other way happens because we did the right thing. And that is the other opinion, that it comes in the time of the month of Tishrei, when it's time of judgment and we earn it. Now, I want to share with you one thing, though. In that discussion in the Talmud of when the Mashiach is going to come, what month, so there's a back and forth between these two rabbis, two great sages, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. They're arguing exactly, but they're not arguing, if you understand, because they're talking about two different ways that Mashiach can come. Are we going to earn it? And then it's like because we did it, or is it going to be that no, he's like a poor person because it's all kindness because we didn't merit it, so God sends it to us anyway. So there's a discussion back and forth, and then one of the rabbis asked the other. He said, "Listen, but what do you mean they're gonna change? Everyone's going to change. Look at the world. The world is people are changing." So he says, "Yeah, I'll tell you like this. This is a scary thing, but it may happen through this way." Says that there will be an evil king like Haman, that will be coming out in the world, and it'll scare us to the point that we'll all change and do tshuva and turn to God, and then the Mashiach will come. So the answer to Gemara is that, well, maybe we're not going to earn it fully, and maybe it won't be that it's just going to be a gift. It's going to be a combination where God will put into motion certain historical processes that will frighten us, that will make us return, and we'll do tshuva. I'll return, and the Mashiach will come. I want to tell you something. I used to live in Israel. Hopefully, we'll live there again someday soon. I used to live in Israel, and I was there during the Gulf War. And I remember, it was like wild, because if you remember what happened then, Bush Sr. told Israel not to fight back, not to do anything to Iraq. Iraq was dropping Scud missiles. We were all nervous it was chemical warfare. So what happened was we would sit in our sealed rooms and sit there. And what was every Jew in Israel doing? Only one thing. They were praying. The modern Hebrew word for a bomb is called tilim. And the word Psalms is called Tehillim. So there was a phrase in Israel, Tehillim l'Tehillim, Psalms for bombs. Works in English too, actually. Right. Psalms for bombs. So everyone was praying, and I remember feeling the potential for Mashiach to come was right then, because it was. In every generation, there's the potential for Mashiach to come right in that generation, and if we earn it, it happens. And if we don't, then there's a set time. With compassion, God will bring it out. But that is the history that's unfolding. Now, I'll leave you with one last thought, because if Mashiach is a process, the human process, and by the way, I want to, for those of you out there who are scientifically oriented, I'd like to actually tell you that a lot of the scientific discoveries are really processes of Mashiach. There's four main theories in science. There's the weak force, the strong force, the electromagnetic force. There's a discussion about in science that there's a belief, there's a unifying force that science is looking for. And that's true. Because science is not, people, and this happens in some religions, they made this terrible mistake. Science can't be against Torah. It's the flip side of it. So the understanding of the world, the potential to use Zoom and internet properly, this is unbelievable. And by the way, as you all know, the internet is used for the worst things in the world. The worst things in the world. And that's why many sages in Israel just forbid it altogether. I certainly understand it. But the fact that I can speak to you around the globe and talk about Torah and God, there is going to be a revolution of everything to a world of clarity. And so the entire world is moving towards the times of Mashiach, scientifically and otherwise. Now, otherwise is interesting because on one hand, most people are largely monotheistic in a certain sense. A lot of people who believe in these things that are wrong, it's kind of like what they got from their family and this and that. But the idea of one God is people, who make other calculations, they try to explain why it's really one. You have to understand this, and I don't know if you all realize this, but when Abraham said there was one God, they thought he was nuts. Not just Abraham. In the time of the Romans looked at the Jews and they said, I said, where's your God? Are you praying? Who are you praying to? I said, praying to God. They said, well, where is he? I said, you can't see him. I said, what kind of God is that? How many you got? There's one. The world was so bad and so confused that there has been a positive revolution that Abraham was successful. The idea of monotheism has spread through the world. But as you probably are all well aware of, in certain ways, the world is crazier than ever. And you got to wonder, if Mashiach is bringing the redemption and clarity, why does the world look as bad as it does? The sages tell us, it's the very thing the way the world's built. The darkest hour is when? It's before the dawn. And so therefore what's happening is that the lies that people are still stuck in, they cling to them before the time of clarity. People, and that's what you see in our world today. People they don't know, men and women are men. There's a belief that there's nothing, there's no boundaries of anything. Where do these beliefs come from? Is a clinging to an idea of, no, I'm not going to go and subscribe to God creating the world and creating the parameters and what is right and what is wrong. I'm not going to subscribe to that. And people are clinging to that. That's the darkest hour before the dawn. But don't be confused and think we're not moving towards this point of clarity. We are. We are scientifically, we are to a certain degree morally, and the things that are stuck is because those are digging their heels in before they're revealed. And before the time Mashiach comes to show that there's one God in this world, he's all benevolent, and he wants for our good, and he gives us the paths by which to connect to him, and ushering in the time where everyone could see clearly. It says the prophecy by when the Messiah comes, Mashiach comes, the world will be filled with the knowledge of God, the way the waters fill the sea. The whole world will be filled with clarity, understanding, and knowledge of God, which will then lead to long life, health, wealth, and happiness. Okay, thank you all. We're going to open up some questions, ideas, and comments.